Good morning. I am Gemma Bowler, president of the Chapel Hill-Carrboro Area Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Along with our sponsoring partners, Kappa Omicron Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, Triangle Park, North Carolina Chapter of the Lynx Incorporated, and the Youth Council of the Chapel Hill-Carrboro branch of the NAACP, we bring greetings and welcome to our speakers, our moderators, attendees, for joining us for Women Voices. We are speaking affordable housing, a local response to a national challenge. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority's National Social Action Commission was officially established in 1963. The commission leads the sorority advocacy efforts for laws and policy to sustain and expand the rights and privileges and citizenship to all people and to protect the most vulnerable among us. These advocacy efforts are infused in the organization to include the national, regional, state, chapter, and individual levels, to include the sorority's 5-point programmatic thrust: educational development, economic development, international awareness and involvement, physical and mental health, and political awareness and involvement. Today's program is aligned with the sorority's advocacy efforts, and we look forward to an informative session. Let me say thank you to the award-winning Social Action Committee of this chapter, under the leadership of Mary Phillips, Senator Valerie Foushee, and Robin Campbell. Let us also pause for a moment in silence to honor the life and legacy of our soror, Yvonne Lewis, a steadfast community leader and advocate for social action across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you, sorors and attendees.
Good morning. I am Dwana McDougall, and it is my pleasure to serve as the president of Triangle Park Chapter of the Lynx Incorporated. I welcome you to Women's Voices. We are speaking. Our topic today is affordable housing, a local response to a national challenge. We are aware women and people of color are disproportionately impacted by this housing crisis. While affordable housing has been an issue for poor renters, even middle-income households are facing greater challenges, particularly in urban areas with strong job markets. The Triangle is no exception. Today's presentation aims to highlight the realities of today's affordable housing challenges. Our distinguished panelists will seek to examine 3 broad approaches to affordable housing: rental assistance, housing assistance, and regulatory policies. Every day, our leaders are working to preserve and to expand the supply chain of good quality housing, as well as making existing housing affordable. I am certain that we will learn today, as private citizens and organizations, ways that we can make a positive change. I would like to thank our fellow sponsors and partners, Chapel Hill-Carrboro Area Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, Kappa Omicron Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, and the Youth Council of Chapel Hill-Carrboro NAACP. A very special thanks to our program organizers for this timely presentation. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. My name is London Graham, and I am the president of the Kappa Omicron chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. We are so excited to be able to serve as a co-sponsor for this very informative event. We hope that you are all able to take away important information about how to further address this national issue. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Diane Pledger, a member of Chapel Hill-Carrboro Area Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I am happy to introduce our moderator for the first session this morning. We bring greetings and we're happy to have joining us Dena J. King. Dena J. King was officially sworn in as United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina on November 29th, 2021. Ms. King was nominated by President Joseph R. Biden Jr. on September 28th, 2021, and was confirmed by the United States Senate on November 19th, 2021. Ms. King is the first person of color to be appointed as U.S. Attorney in the Western District. With over 15 years of public service, U.S. Attorney King leads an office of approximately 100 federal prosecutors and staff located in Charlotte and in Asheville that serves over 3 million residents throughout North Carolina. 32 westernmost counties, including residents of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian Reservation. U.S. Attorney King joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of North Carolina in September of 2020 as a deputy criminal chief overseeing the violent crimes and narcotics section, and as a lead task force attorney for the U.S. Office Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. U.S. Attorney King graduated magna cum laude from North Carolina State University in 2003, where she received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Management. Ms. King received her Juris Doctorate degree in 2006 from North Carolina Central University School of Law. Ms. King is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and she has served as the past regional chair of social action for the South Atlantic region. We welcome Attorney Dena King as our moderator for our Session 1, Federal Role in Affordable Housing. Welcome, Attorney King.
Good morning to everyone. Good Saturday morning. As Soror Pledger mentioned, I am Dena King. I'm delighted to be with you this morning, and I have the pleasure of moderating an amazing panel discussion on federal role in affordable housing. At this time, I would like to introduce to you our speaker, Demetria McCain. Ms. McCain is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, frequently referred to as HUD. Prior to serving in this capacity, she spent 15 years, most recently as the president at the Inclusive Communities Project, which is a Dallas-based affordable fair housing organization. Prior to becoming president, she oversaw operations, communications, and ICP's Mobility Assistance Program, which was a housing mobility program that served housing choice voucher holders who desired housing in low poverty, well-resourced neighborhoods throughout the 7-county Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Conceived by Ms. McCain's ICP's Voices for Opportunity initiative has provided advocacy training to voucher holders fighting for expanding housing options and Black and Latino neighborhood groups seeking neighborhood equity. Ms. McCain is a recipient of the 2015 Texas Houser Award and has been a sought-after panelist and commenter on issues relating to affordable fair housing. She currently serves as an adjunct instructor at Coppin State University, Baltimore, where she teaches a fair housing and homelessness course to upper-level undergraduate students. Before joining ICP, she worked as an Equal Justice Works Fellow and a staff attorney at the National Housing Law Project in Oakland, California, where she worked on preemption issues as they related to rural housing program. As a staff attorney for the Neighborhood Legal Services Program of Washington, D.C., assigned to the Southeast office, her portfolio primarily focused on landlord-tenant matters for low-income renters living in private and public housing. She has served on several local and national nonprofit boards, but beyond her work in parenting to 2 young adult children, she engages in various local volunteer efforts through the Dallas Alumnae chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and her church. She received her Juris Doctorate from Howard University School of Law, her master's degree from Brooklyn College, and her bachelor's degree from New York University. We are so excited to have you with us today. So there are a number of questions that I would like to pose, and many of these questions were actually received from registrants in advance. I would encourage all the attendees, as we interact in this discussion of question and answer, if you have additional questions, please utilize the chat feature of Zoom and pose your questions in that chat feature, and we will make sure that we address your question. Let's get started. The first question is, how is the federal government playing a role in improving the home ownership process?
Well, that's a really timely question. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for that introduction, Attorney King. I appreciate that. And hello to all of the folks in North Carolina. I'm so happy and pleased to be with you. Both happy to be with, of course, my sorors, but also the Links and the NAACP, and particularly the youth. So important is to get our youth involved in some of these issues. That's really critical. So as it relates to home ownership, folks, if you missed it Thursday, and you may have if you have a day job, Thursday was a huge day here at HUD, as well as other agencies in the country. Appraisal bias has been in the news constantly. It's growing and growing and growing. Appraisal bias is negatively impacting Black homeowners or those who want to refinance, as well as people of other ethnicities. And so the report came out Thursday regarding what the interagency task force who's been studying this ever since the Tulsa 100th anniversary took place last year, studying on an interagency basis, not just HUD, but other agencies as well. And so they've actually issued an action plan as far as what we as the government will do regarding these issues. It's not just a report, it's an actual action plan. So there's more study to be done, but it is very clear based on what they've studied so far, how much appraisal bias is impacting Black homeowners and other homeowners of other ethnicities and races outside of white non-Hispanic homeowners. It's on YouTube. It was introduced by Vice President Kamala Harris Thursday. The task force was led by our very own Secretary Marsha Fudge, as well as Ambassador Rice from the White House. And so that rollout took place on YouTube. So please, I invite you to go to YouTube. You can go to the pave.gov website to get to that if you can't get it through YouTube. But you won't only hear about the action plan, you will hear from actual people who experience the appraisal bias that's really, really hurting folks. And this is a really important issue to Secretary Fudge, because home ownership can lead to increased wealth. And that's where people of color, particularly Black people, are lacking, right? As far as buying that home, as well as refinancing your home. And so there's things that we're doing here at HUD to really kind of focus in and hone in on that issue. Additionally speaking, we're working with other agencies, because there are other agencies in the government that really kind of monitor banking aspects. My particular office, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, we actually, under the Fair Housing Act, which is 54 years old now, we actually are able to enforce the Fair Housing Act against lenders who may be discriminating. However, there are other agencies like Consumer Finance Bureau. They enforce issues regarding fair lending. And so there are issues that people are seeing that are bubbling up on the issue of fair lending. So we want to make sure that there's no discrimination in fair lending, because that at the end of the day impacts home ownership. And Secretary Fudge on this issue of home ownership is really, really big about making sure people understand that we have taken steps so that student debt does not set somebody back when they're trying to get that loan to buy a home. So that was a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, this is great. You brought up the concept of fair lending. And so I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the incentives currently being used, or possibly what other incentives could be used by the federal government to encourage local lenders to partner with local government to then finance building affordable housing.
What the actual partnership is something that's a little bit out of my realm, but let me say this. Our office did something really, we thought, significant that all of the other federal agencies were waiting to hear from HUD, because through the Equal Opportunity Act, ECOA, I should say, Equal Opportunity Credit Act, there is language in there that says that there could be special purpose credit programs. Now, let me explain what a special purpose credit program is. A special purpose credit program is a type of program that a bank could have that can focus on people who have historically been locked out of the credit market. And we know who that is, right? However, banks have been reluctant to use that tool because they were afraid that they may be found, get sued or found out of compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So a lot of the other agencies who really focus in on lending, because we're not the major fair lending agency, like the OCC, the others that I've mentioned. But what we did recently is that we had our attorneys issue guidance that said, in fact, there are certain lending institutions that, according to ECOA, would not be in violation of the Fair Housing Act if they were to actually create these special purpose credit programs. So Secretary Fudge convened her peer colleagues from other agencies, and they had discussions about this. And actually, just a few weeks ago, they released a statement. I'll be happy to put it in the chat for you. They released a statement making sure that banks and others know that this is a tool that can be used. And more importantly, this is a tool that can be used for people who are of communities that have been locked out of home lending and the credit market. Again, a long response to your question, but that's really significant and it's new, and I don't know that a lot of people know about that.
Now, we are, with our various organizations, on the ground advocates. And so my next question has to do with many affordable housing advocates like to conflate or combine discussions on affordable and workforce housing together, where they will combine homelessness, low income, and then the needs of middle class. Is this an approach that we should do? Should we be combining all of those different factors together, or do we need to more appropriately address each individually?
That's a wonderful question, and it really shows how elevated your conversations are. And so in the federal government, this is the way folks think about housing issues. It was many, many decades ago that it was determined that affordability is generally seen as making sure that the amount of money a household spends on rent or mortgage and utilities should not exceed 30% of the household income, right? So what's affordable to you may not be affordable to, right, the Bill Gates, right? What's affordable to you might not be affordable to someone who perhaps is earning a minimum income wage, right? So that's key. That when we hear the word affordable housing, it's a little tricky because we're like, who are we talking about here, right? And so that's one aspect of what we're calling affordable, no more than 30% of your income. But on the other side, the way HUD programs kind of fall out, are they're categorized between people who are extremely low income, very low income, or moderate income. So there are varying levels of income. And the question is, are we targeting programs to which of those levels? Middle, very low, extremely low, or low, right? And so that's the key. So you, as you all work in your communities, want to think about who we like to target. And again, I can also send you guys links as a follow-up so that you know where those income bands are, right? So are you wanting to target and talk about people who are working at the Starbucks full-time? Are you wanting to target people who are renting but are just about ready to buy a home, right? And perhaps those are two different sets of people. But in all instances, the way the federal government looks at it is that you shouldn't pay, if you're paying more than 30% of your income towards rent and utilities, you are cost burden. So that's a word that we use, cost burden. I hope that helps.
It does. So you've talked a little bit about the concept of fair housing. And so I want to move to, as we talk about affordable housing, why is it simply not just the issue with supply and demand? What are some of the other factors that we need to be conscious of that, quite honestly, prevents people from being able to purchase housing or even to obtain housing?
Give me your question one more time, please.
In terms of affordable housing, why is the issue simply not dealing with supply and demand?
Well, if you're just
what other external factors?
Certainly. Supply and demand means let's just let the market do what it does, right? So when the market has done what it does historically, people of color and people people who may have a disability have not always fared well, and in many instances have fared poorly, right? So if we let the market do what the market does, and let's be clear, I am not saying that capitalism is not valuable, not at all. Please don't make that mistake. But all parts of our market, in all markets, not just housing, have some kind of guardrails, you might say, or need some type of guardrail. So we can see, if we look back to the days of redlining, for instance, right? Back in the 1930s, when the federal government created these maps, right? That really kind of confined people to where they could and could not live. That really was the federal government putting their thumb on the scale, telling people where to live and where not to live, right? And so where was that? Where people of color ended up being next to levees, next to factories, and next to other environmental impacted areas, right? Areas that perhaps would be seen land-wise less valuable than others. So in essence, we've never really just let the market do what it wanted to do, right? Because right there, I just gave an example of how the federal government has impacted it's the supply and demand free market concept, right? And so the free market concept, supply and demand, doesn't work and has never worked without some kind of input from local, state, and federal government, right? So on the local level, we have zoning laws, right? What can go where? There are some communities that refuse to build apartments in certain parts of town. There's some communities that refuse to that actually place environmentally hazardous factories or what have you in certain neighborhoods. And that's where people are steered to live from a fair housing point of view. Then at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, the home lending world, we've seen segregation or discrimination, I should say, in the home lending world. And so again, you may have a family ready to buy, ready, willing, and able to buy, but because of other factors of taking perhaps ethnicity or race into consideration, the market's not free. And even though there's demand, they have demand. These folks I told you with the appraisal bias situations, lived experiences, they had the land, they had the money, but they weren't able to move in the way that others are.
Thank you for that response. I want to move next to the Build Back Better Act. We know it's currently stalled in Congress, but we know that this bill would in fact expand rental assistance. It would preserve public housing, provide some assistance in the building and preservation of homes in extremely low income households. And many of our attendees are a bit fearful that in order for this to be passed, that there will be several provisions that may be cut from the larger bill. Can you kind of speak to that? In particular, maybe about the low-income housing tax credit and the average income test, just some of those areas that may be cut that we're really concerned about.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of what the White House and administration wants to do. What I can say is that there are aspects that were in Build Back Better on the housing related side that are trying to be put forward now as we speak in other forms of fashion. So I can say that. But what I could talk about, if you would give me an opportunity to, is something I think that your audience would be interested in, and that is House America. If I have time.
Please.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about House America, and really first let me start with what led to this new initiative under HUD, and it's near and dear to Secretary Fudge. After really a steady decreases from 2010 to 2016, homelessness in the United States increased even more prior to COVID-19. Now, according to HUD's 2020 annual homeless assessment report, more than 580,000 people experienced homelessness in the US in a single night in 2020. I don't know if you all are aware, but every year there's a point in time count that takes place around the country, usually around January or February in different communities, local communities throughout the country. And that's when we actually count on that particular night, local communities do, how many people are homeless and unsheltered. So now the pandemic really created additional urgency to address the crisis, given, the heightened risk of people experiencing homelessness. House America really is an all hands on deck kind of effort to address the nation's homelessness crisis, really kind of at the federal level. But the Housing America is really inviting mayors and cities and county leaders, tribal nation leaders even, and governors to really kind of partner with us as the federal government. And so House America intends to utilize the historic investments that were provided through the American Rescue Plan to address housing as a housing first approach. Now, for folks who don't know that phrase, housing first means let's get people housed and then we can deal with some of the other social issues that they have instead of trying to deal with the social issues while they're unsheltered. So that's what housing first is. So now, through the American Rescue Plan, communities now have historic resources. There were 70,000 emergency vouchers. There were $5 billion in home grants and really kind of significant investments to really kind of preserve and protect housing on various lands. And so that's really huge and really important. And there are different cities throughout the country, city councils and mayors who've signed on their commitment to support HUD's House America initiative. And to date, the mayors of Charlotte, Durham, Greensboro, Raleigh, and Salisbury have committed to House America. So I know you folks are all about action and doing things. So if I didn't name your community in that list of North Carolina communities who have actually signed up to commit to House America, I really encourage you to maybe go to our website and just go to HUD.gov, look up House America, and there you can click on to learn more and get more information from us if you're interested in trying to do what you can to get your local community to maybe sign up to join us and partner with House America. Through House America, we've heard mayors really kind of commit and dedicate themselves to saying, our community is going to build X number of new affordable housing units. And so we're really excited about that. It's getting a lot of attention from the secretary, and we're having more and more communities sign up, and we'd love to have more of your communities sign up. So thank you for that.
And I have just dropped in the chat the website for House America so that people can learn more about it, but also so that we can, you just gave us a call to action and told us that if we did not hear our cities named, some efforts that we can do within our local communities to push for this. And so we appreciate that. I'll now see if there are any questions. I've looked in the chat. I don't see any questions coming from members of our attendees, but if there are any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat feature. You talked a little bit, I've got one final question before I'd love to give you some time to kind of close up, give us some wrap up discussions. You've talked significantly about what is conceived or this term of affordable housing and how that term is in fact different depending on what your financial makeup is. Throughout the pandemic, we have noticed the development of a lot of comprehensive programs at the local, state, and federal level to assist landlords and tenants to avoid eviction and to be able to maintain their housing. My question is, even once the pandemic finally ends, if that were ever to happen, housing insecurity will continue as a problem. So what do you think? And I think you've talked a lot about the Housing America, so that may be the approach, but what do you think we can do to prevent just a wave of evictions occurring nationally? And how do we transition to this in our future?
That is a really, really great question.
I know it's a big one.
That's a great question. I mean, I think, well, from the federal level, our objective is to make sure that the resources are there, right? To make sure that people have the funding on the housing side to get into homes, right? And so one example, for instance, is how many of the people that you're talking about are cost burden, right? Evictions quite often are either about two things. And this is from my experience having been a legal services attorney. Non-payment of rent or violation of the lease in some other form or fashion. So to the extent people are threatened with eviction because of non-payment of rent, why don't we have more people? Let me just pause right there and say, there are things that's called housing choice vouchers or Section 8 vouchers, right?
Right.
Only 1 in 4 people who qualify to get a housing choice voucher actually gets one. And that's because of how much, money is allocated for that type of program. And so there are scores of people all over the country who are on waiting lists to get these kind of vouchers, which would help them pay for the rent, right? Because the housing choice voucher ensures that the household's not paying more than 30% of their income towards their rent. And so if people really are not, as I called it, cost burden, then they're less likely to be evicted for non-payment of rent. And so again, call to action, if you hear a call to action in that, we don't have enough housing choice vouchers as a country, right? On the issue of evictions, I mean, a lot of times the nuances of evictions are really kind of like state and local matters. So on the federal side, if we could make sure that for all of those families who financially qualify, meaning they're in that category of very low or extremely low income, because there are a lot of people who are in those bandwidths, if we can make sure that enough of those people had vouchers, then that would keep them from being cost burden and keep them from being evicted for non-payment of rent. Now, the other side of that, which sometimes we call it maybe on the fair housing side of it, you might say, or we call it voucher discrimination. We don't have enough landlords learning about the program and agreeing to sign up for the program. In some communities, you have 2 residents who pretty much are exactly the same. They all qualify according to the tenant screening criteria, but because they're using one of these vouchers, where the landlord would get guaranteed rent, right? They're not accepted as tenants. And so that's another issue that's, there's been a lot of news media and press about that. And we in the government are trying to see what we can do to kind of diminish discrimination against housing choice vouchers. And in some communities, we know who has a voucher and who doesn't, right? People of all races have housing choice vouchers, but in some communities, it may be trends towards one race or one ethnicity.
We have a number of questions that are coming in that are directly related to what you've been speaking about. One question pertains specifically to the House America program. And the question is, how do people that are experiencing homelessness access the program and housing?
Well, I can't, we have someone on staff who's really kind of specializing in that.
Okay.
But throughout the country, HUD actually funds local homelessness assistance nonprofits. There's the community of care program. There's funding through our community development program that we provide cities. So cities who do receive that type of HUD funding have local nonprofits who administer these programs. I mentioned the 70,000 vouchers through the House America, through the ARC funding, right? And that would be administered through local housing authority or through the local nonprofit that addresses homelessness types of issues. Community of care is a program that you might want to look at.
Perfect, thank you. What about, how is your office tracking and working against environmental racism that's perpetrated through discriminatory housing policies?
Well, it's important for you to understand that this is bigger than HUD. The Biden-Harris administration has an initiative called Justice 40. And the Justice 40 initiative focuses on environmental climate change issues. And within that, we all know a lot of times we hear the phrase climate change and we think, oh, that's just for the people who are like vegetarian and vegans and, you know, wear sandals all year, right? But climate change impacts Black, Latinx communities in a way it doesn't impact others as much. It has an impact on the whole country. And so we recognize, as I said earlier, a lot of times, if you take those old 1930s and 1940s redlining maps and you put them on top of today's map of where we have majority Black and Latinx neighborhoods, you may find similarities. And when you do, you may very well find neighborhoods that are in flood zones or neighborhoods or in areas where if there is an environmental or a climate issue, those are the neighborhoods that are impacted first. And as I mentioned earlier, many times a lot of our communities are near a lot of these factories that give off noxious fumes or may have types of activities that produce lead in the ground. So there actually is a real effort to address environmental justice. And there's a working group of right now of local folks, not just through HUD. Like I said, this is a federal-wide, government-wide initiative who are kind of looking at these issues. So if you're interested in this type of work or these types of issues, just let me know. And when they do have periodically, we have stakeholder listening sessions where we invite stakeholders and we sit and we listen to some of the concerns and complaints. Happy to include you in that list.
And we've also placed in the chat, thank you, someone sent it to me, the Justice 40 initiative that you just talked about. And so it includes some information about that. Now, this is a really good question. This deals with home ownership and Medicaid. And the person that typed this in gave kind of a hypothetical to get to the point. They've described a situation when many hardworking Black families buy a home and an elderly family member needs long-term care. Medicaid requires the home would need to be transferred to someone 5 years in advance. And if not transferred, then potentially a lien is placed on the home. And this cycle seems to repeat itself over and over again, where most able-bodied Black homeowners have a very hard time being able to turn over their assets to relatives 5 years in advance when they don't know that long-term care will be needed. So the question is, why does it appear that that system, that requirement is so punitive, especially as it pertains to members within the minority community that are just trying to do the right thing by actually owning homes?
Actually, I'm writing this down because this is a little outside of my expertise, but I'm writing it down to maybe confer with the colleague, and I can get back to your organizers on that.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you. There's another question that talks about a different topic dealing with low-income housing as it relates to the elderly. And so are there certain things that your office is doing specific to housing for elderly to make sure that housing is affordable for them as well?
Actually, we are looking specifically at this issue. Again, this is another one of those issues that is near and dear to Secretary Fudge. And Secretary Fudge has publicly stated that her mother, who I believe she says is about 90, has friends, and her friends approached her and like, hey, what are you doing for our demographic? So it is something that we're having conversations about. We're not at the stage of saying anything publicly on it, but it is definitely something that we are in discussions about.
Perfect. That at least lets us know that it is on your radar, and that's, as
and it's
advocates,
on Secretary Fudge's radar for sure.
we like to make sure as advocates that different things are on the radar of those that can make a difference. So the final question that I see before I open it up to you to provide some closing remarks is, what are some programs that could assist first-time homeowners in an inflated market that we're seeing right now? Home buyers, individuals that want to buy homes for the first time, but with the price of homes being so inflated, are there any programs that could assist first-time home buyers?
Well, I think you'll find the programs on the local level, but I will say this, that our office has made a point that to ensure that we have there are houses that have been foreclosed upon that perhaps we had, mortgage insurance on, right? And so we have houses in our inventory, you might say. In the past, those groups of houses have been sold to for-profit conglomerates, you might say. And so our office, through our FHA division, has made sure that nonprofits, local nonprofits, get the opportunity to buy those houses. And when those nonprofits are able to buy those houses, they're able to sell them at affordable rates to people in the local community. So that's something we're doing on our end, and public-private partnership is so important in making sure that local nonprofits are the ones buying these houses so that these homes are more affordable. Now, whether or not there are local nonprofits in your community who have done that, I'm not sure, but I'll try to find the link for you in our FHA division page that perhaps may give you an idea of who's doing that. But it's something that we've done from the federal level to kind of open up the market.
Although I said I had a last question, I was just alerted that there was one more question that I inadvertently overlooked. In the Durham and Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, one of the things that we're seeing is a large jump or increase in the pricing of homes. And so the question is, have you seen that as a national trend, or is this more of a local? I know you might not know locally, but okay.
Absolutely. It's all, we get news clips here from all across the country every morning. We get the news clips, and the news clips are just full of how the prices of homes are going up all over the country. So you are not alone, North Carolina. It's happening everywhere. And it's really most extreme you'll see on the coast, but it's happening in the Rust Belt and other areas as well, and in the southern part of the country as well. It's a national problem. It's a national issue because these prices are going up, but are we actually seeing like incomes going up at the same rate? I think you know the answer to that.
No, we're seeing gas go up. We're seeing groceries go up. We see everything but our salaries and income increasing. So great. If you could give us some.
That's why it's so important to make sure that these nonprofits are able to buy up these houses. The nonprofit developers are able to buy the houses so that they can turn them over to people who are at the lower income spectrum.
And on cue, I've just placed in the chat some HUD-approved nonprofit organizations and government entities for our attendees to review and see. Now, I'd love to give you the opportunity to give us some closing remarks on what we can be doing, and also some things for us to just keep in mind.
Well, I just want to remind people what I mentioned earlier regarding getting information about House America, and that was in the chat. But I have to tell you, as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a week from now, we'll be actually in Fair Housing Month. April is Fair Housing Month. And for people who don't know, I always have to give this history lesson. It was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife actually picked up from the South and moved to Chicago, where the Chicago advocates were asking him to come visit because there was so much housing discrimination. So they actually moved there and lived in a small apartment in Chicago. He had been advocating for a fair housing bill for ages. As we all know, he was assassinated in April. And this housing issue, fair housing issue, is something he had been working with Congress and working with the president on for a good bit of time. And it actually was in the wake of his assassination that the Fair Housing Act was finally passed, literally 7 days after his assassination. Senator Brooks, Senator Mondale were key authors of that. And so we do recognize and commemorate that every April. And on April 5th, our office, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, will be rolling out our virtual Fair Housing Month ceremony. So I invite you to join in. It's virtual. It'll be online. You don't have to look at it in a particular time. But I would invite you to listen to that and hear about the various levels of housing discrimination. And I say that because our office is in the middle of rewriting and revising a very important rule called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. The Obama administration came out with it. The last administration annihilated it, and we're bringing it back. What is it? Many people don't know. A lot of people know that fair housing has to do with don't discriminate. Absolutely. But there's another portion to that rule that says that if you are a recipient of HUD funds, you must proactively go out of your way to affirmatively further fair housing, meaning you need to identify what the fair housing problems are in your community, and you need to take some actionable steps to do something. So we will be coming out with a revision of that rule in the coming months. We'll seek comments on it. And once that rule is finalized, understand that local communities that get HUD funding, like Community Development Block Grant funding, have a duty to engage the community. That's you. And when they engage the community, when it's time for them to do their report on affirmatively furthering fair housing, they must listen to you all and take note of the fair housing issues you all recognize in your local communities. And from that, they are to take right out to us the steps they would take to address some of those issues. So we're working on that seriously. I'm actually here at the office today to kind of trying to put some finishing touches so we can move the process along. But please understand the phrase, affirmatively furthering fair housing. And what you can do now, if your community receives money from HUD, is go ahead and ask them to take a look at the previous plan, because communities have had this duty for ages. It's just that we're refining how we implement this duty. And so ask them, hey, may I look, can you please email me, or is it on your website? Where is your fair housing plan? And I'd like to see that. So that's one thing I would suggest that you all perhaps pay attention to.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, and for just breaking down for us things that we need to keep in mind as it pertains to affordable housing at the federal level. We truly appreciate your work and what you are doing to ensure that more people across our nation have the opportunity to live in stable housing. So thank you so much. I will turn the program back over to Sora Pledger.
Sora Pledger, before you come in, this is Mary Phillips. I want to thank the Assistant Secretary for her time today, for the fabulous interaction she's had with our moderator and therefore with our entire group. And I want to ask you to please give a special thank you to Secretary Marsha Fudge for us. Thank you so much.
I absolutely will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sora Phillips, and thank you to our speakers and our moderator. That was an excellent session. There was so much good information that was passed along. The questions were just right on point. And speaking of questions, please place your questions in the chat for everyone, not just to the panelists and moderators, so that we can all share and see the questions. We ask that you do that. That was just fantastic. I have chills up and down just learning so much, and we just really appreciate you joining us today. I do want to remind everyone, please, there will be the survey in the chat. We want you to complete that survey, and we would like for you also, this is our QR code for the survey, which you can use your phone and download the survey. We will be giving away a gift certificate, a gift card, for those who complete the survey. So if you are interested in being a winner, we want to make sure we get your feedback and complete that survey form. Thank you so very much. We will now take a 3-minute break. We'll take a 3-minute stretch break, and we will be back. It's 10:59. We will be back at 11:02, I believe, 11:02. Thank you so much, and we will take a break. Welcome back. Hope you had a time to stretch your legs. Just some clarification. If you are sending questions, please send questions to any of the hosts that you see in the chat. It will not go to everyone, but any of the hosts, and we are monitoring the chat. So send questions to the host. Thank you so much. We are now ready to move to our session number 2, the role of local government, developers, and nonprofit organizations. But first, we will have a video. First, we will have a video. And then we will go to our next session. Thank you.
Affordable housing can be integrated into the redevelopment of downtowns all over the state. And now that it's happened and everybody involved's gotten it done, and we see the end product, that we're like, we can't go back to doing things the way we used to. Folks aren't going to look at affordable housing the same after having an opportunity to see Willard Street.
"2020 was a really hard year for me. I was going from job to job because places were opening and closing because of COVID. I ended up living with my baby girl for 8 months, and that was awkward because I took care of her all her life, and now here I am living with her. And when I got the email from Willard Street Apartments, I knew that 2021 was about to be better. It's very affordable. It takes away the fear of going to your mailbox and getting that bill that you know you cannot pay. This is definitely home for me. And my apartment screams, Renee.
Durham Can's work is rooted in a theory of change that looks at the pressures that our families and our neighbors are facing. And one of the concerns that we were hearing from our institutions was the growing need for affordable and low-income housing because of how the community was continuing to grow. For instance, residents find themselves being priced out and pushed out of the communities that they've lived in for generations. The campaign resulted in Durham Can identifying these lots of city-owned and county-owned vacant land and proposing to build low-income, affordable housing on these lots that were also close to public transportation. That campaign really spurred, I think, a new conversation within the city about how to meet this burgeoning need.
We desperately want downtown to be a place where lots of different people can afford to live, and not just those people with a lot of money. And Willard Street is that. This is beautiful housing by anyone's standards, and all of our affordable housing needs to be of this caliber. But to get to that really did take just a tremendous amount of work. It took a lot of political will to say that we wanted to spend the money to donate the land to make this happen. It took bringing in other partners as well as the city's fund. So all that needed to happen. And then we needed to win a competitive 9% low-income housing tax credit.
And it was an opportunity to really be part of this experiment where we could show that you could do, high quality, affordable housing in an infill site in downtown where we're seeing, the costs go through the roof for rent and all the market rate development and luxury housing and not enough housing for, low to moderate income families.
My name is Andrea Gatewood. I'm getting ready to move to Willard Street.
I'm going to take you around and just kind of show you everything. Oh,
look out and see me at the bus station. I catch the bus to work, and sometimes I was having to catch the bus home in the dark, so I didn't like that at all. I feel like I'm not going to be stressed anymore.
Self-Help and DHIC joined together. We submitted an application saying we thought we'd be a good developer for this site. And so we were selected by the city through that process unanimously. And then we moved forward and went out and got the financing for the project, which includes both tax credits that are key to affordable housing rental development like this, but also funding from Duke University, Capital Broadcasting as kind of key private pieces to help make this project happen.
The core mission of the institution is around teaching and research and healthcare, but we recognize that housing is really a social driver of health, and we want to be a part of creating that access and opportunity for all residents in Durham.
What Willard Street is proof of concept. This is what affordable housing is and will be in Durham, and we're going to do thousands of units of this kind of housing over the next few years.
What Willard Street speaks to me is like, this is what leadership looks like, and this is what can happen when people are clear about what's important to them, willing to be courageous, willing to try something, to take a risk, and most importantly, willing to work together, willing to talk, willing to navigate all of the messiness. You know, the speed of community organizing versus the speed of like commercial real estate development are very different. But I think the outcome is worth it.
Thank you. What a wonderful video and an excellent program that is happening in Durham. I'd like to now introduce our moderator for our next session on the role of local government, developers, and nonprofit organizations. Welcome to Gloria Shealey. As president and CEO of the Daniele Company, Gloria has had more than 25 years in the construction industry as a general contractor and construction manager in building visions, transforming lives for its clients. Over the past 15 years, a key business strategy has been collaborative partnerships with select major construction companies and owners that has allowed the company to build capacity and complete over $600 million in projects targeted in K-12 and higher education, healthcare and life sciences, governmental institutions, and manufacturing concerns focused in pharmaceuticals, automotive, aviation construction. The company has completed over 20 construction management projects as a diverse partner, along with numerous projects as a general contractor. A significant portfolio of work has been in the pharmaceutical, life sciences, and healthcare space, including new construction and laboratory upfit, building long-term Tier 1 relationships extending over 10 years with the city and the county of Durham, self-help ventures, BMW Manufacturing, Honda, Merck, Wake County Public Schools, NC State University, UNC Chapel Hill, and others, has established a distinctive footprint in the industry. Her community engagement encompasses several local, state, and national boards. She was recently appointed to the North Carolina Building Code Council by Governor Roy Cooper and chairs the Energy Committee. She also serves as the executive board of Downtown Durham, Inc. and Emerald Cities Collaborative. She previously served as the first and only woman president of the National Association of Minority Contractors. Gloria has received numerous awards, including the 2018 inaugural NC Women Business Owners Hall of Fame, 2018 Greater Durham Black Chamber of Commerce Businesswoman of the Year, and NAMC National Hall of Fame 2015. She has received several other honors in recognition of her business leadership, community service, construction excellence, and champion women businesses committed to diverse inclusion and economic parity. She is a member of the Chapel Hill-Carrboro Area Alumnae chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, in addition to a member of the Triangle Park chapter of the Links Incorporated. We welcome Gloria Shealey.
Thank you so much, Diane Pledger, for your gracious introduction. It is a pleasure to be here and engage this conversation. The video that we just saw was an excellent introduction to what affordable housing looks like. And I would first, though, like to say that we've heard some phenomenal information from a policy administration perspective on this critically important topic. And there are three areas, and many thanks to Dena King and Principal Assistant Deputy Secretary McCain. Three areas I would just call your attention to make sure that you follow up on. And one relates to the housing, the House America program. And that is clearly an advocacy opportunity for everyone, if your city was not mentioned. The other one would be pay attention to the emerging program that's in place, is the newest program, that special purpose credit program. I think this is something that we, in terms of looking at home ownership in particular, that we want to be advocates around as well with our financial institutions. And then the last one I would say is the Justice 40. Please be on the lookout for initiatives related to that. Everyone, has some impact and is impacted by climate change. One in particular that has been given note is water justice. And if you don't know anything about climate change, you can certainly relate to water justice. So excellent information and conversation that was presented there. What we want to do now is to dive a little deeper on a ground level on this subject and have a conversation that gives us some insight from some of our local leaders in this space to further inform our understanding of the dynamics, the population impacts, and our roles collectively and individually. With that, we're honored to have with us two very outstanding leaders in this space and in their respective areas of this initiative. And I will allow them to introduce themselves. And we will start with Yolanda Winstead, which you saw the excellent video that she spoke on. And then we will have Jackie Jinks to introduce herself as well, because there was an important topic that the Deputy Secretary mentioned that she can further inform us about as well. So Yolanda, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to represent DHIC in this important forum today. I am President and CEO of DHIC. We are a nonprofit based here in Raleigh. We got started back in the mid-70s during a time when the neighborhoods in and around downtown Raleigh were being disinvested in, and people were moving out to the suburbs and leaving the inner city. Our work includes real estate development. We currently own and operate around 45 multifamily properties that serve individuals, families, and seniors of low to moderate income. We have just under 3,000 units in operation. The majority of those are right here around the Triangle area, but we do have properties in 9 counties across the state. And we currently serve about 4,200 residents. About 1,500 or 1,600 or so of those are seniors, and about 1,200 are children under 12. Something else that is an important part of our work is our homeownership center. Through our homeownership center, we provide education and training for folks aspiring to become homeowners, and those programs are targeted to low to moderate income first-time buyers. We've, over the years, developed about 250 units of single-family for-sale housing. And then we've helped about 2,000 families through homeownership education and counseling become homeowners and take advantage of down payment assistance programs that are available through the city of Raleigh. We're currently participating in a program that Wake County's kicked off. We're also partnering with the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency for some of their special financing for low to moderate income buyers, and a lot of the bank and mortgage company partnerships that we have also avail our clients to opportunities for some special financing. Something else that we do that we find is very important is we have a resident services team that's involved in not direct service provision, but connecting the residents who live in our properties to connect with other organizations in our community, mostly nonprofits that are working to provide add-on services and wraparound services to help enrich their lives beyond just the housing, recognizing, as the Principal Deputy Secretary mentioned earlier, about the need for, a housing first model and housing just being the beginning. And then it's kind of to round all that out, we have an asset management team that's responsible for managing our relationships with our third property management company and aligning the business aspect of running those properties with our mission orientation for providing low to moderate income families with housing. We are, as I said, a nonprofit. We're governed by a board of directors of 15 members on our board, and our current board chair is Mia Bailey, who is the governmental relations person with Spectrum Bank, and then we also have Betsy Rosakas is our vice chair. Again, I'm so happy and excited to be here this morning and talk to you a little bit about what we do and what we're trying to do to help with the affordable housing issues that we've been working for so many years. And I'll turn it back over to Gloria.
Thank you. Jackie Jinks, would you please introduce yourself? Thank you so much, Yolanda.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. It is truly a privilege to be learning from this esteemed panel of women leaders and be with you today having this important conversation. I am a social worker who has spent the last 25 years doing anti-poverty and anti-homelessness work, first in San Francisco and Oakland, California, and now here in the Triangle as the current president and CEO of Interfaith Council for Social Service, where I've spent the past 5 years. I'm passionate that housing is a human right for every person, and I'm working for a country where that is the reality. IFC is a community-based organization here in Chapel Hill-Carrboro, which provides the only shelters in Orange County for people experiencing homelessness. We provide a permanent supportive housing program for folks with disabilities who need significant support services in order to maintain their housing. We offer food security programs, including groceries and daily hot meals, emergency financial assistance, and we have Activate IFC, which is a program that focuses on confronting the causes of poverty through advocacy, civic engagement, and leadership development. All of our programs address the issue of housing insecurity by providing emergency housing for people who are unhoused, by offering food and emergency assistance to help people stretch their household budgets, and by actively working to center the voices of people with lived experience and advocate for truly affordable housing for all in our community. Orange County has the largest income disparity in North Carolina, which means we have the most unequal distribution of income throughout the population. And so we are here in this community working on that issue, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Clearly, both of you are covering a vast aspect of this whole issue of affordable housing. So I first would like to ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Yolanda, what are you most passionate about in your role, and where do you see the most critical need that you can address, and how are you doing that?
Not sure that's an easy question to answer. There's so much I'm proud of about the work that we do here at DHIC. And it's our holistic approach to trying to, work to provide housing and opportunities for families. I think I probably would have to say what I'm most passionate about is when we have, I think our ultimate goal is to provide opportunities along the full spectrum of housing for residents that we serve. So to have, we've had families that have gone from, living in one of our communities as a renter, moving on to home ownership, using that home ownership to build wealth for their family and use that wealth to either educate their children or start their own businesses. And so I think, seeing the success of families that go through that entire kind of journey, moving from just having an affordable place to stay to moving on to becoming homeowners and building wealth that they can pass down to future generations is probably what I think I'm most passionate about, and seeing us be able to see more and more of our residents do that. And I think it is having people be able to move along that spectrum is probably one of the most critical things we can work on these days, is because we don't want to be in a situation where we find ourselves a lot of times, even like in public housing or even in private units that are affordable, where you see people living in those units generation after generation and not really building any wealth and being able to, move on to homeownership or other types of housing. And so that's kind of part of why we have somewhat of the issue we have today, is that there's not enough supply and we're not moving people through that spectrum in a fashion that creates opportunities for those coming behind them as well.
Very good. And I think that the Assistant Deputy Secretary spoke about the challenges with supply and demand, which is both political as well as in terms of economic resources in that regard. So Jackie, for you, what are you most passionate about in your role, and what do you see as the most critical need?
Yeah, so I think, we are seeing people every single day who just cannot meet their basic needs for housing and food and healthcare. And this includes people who come to us who are teachers and healthcare workers, construction workers, people in the service industry, people who are staying with us in our shelters, people who are coming for basic assistance, just are not able to have their income match what it costs to live here in this community. And so my greatest passion is that all people will be able to live in our community, and this community can meet everyone's basic needs. And we're so grateful for partners like DHIC, where our folks have been able to move into their units and pay that 30% of their income and be able to live sustainably. So.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I think it was important that the audience appreciate and hear that these are not just roles and positions for each of you, that this is, you're grounded in your belief and the work that you're doing. And I think it's helpful to help others to understand, and I'm gonna ask this of you, Yolanda, what does it really mean when we talk about affordable housing? Because there are so many, as you heard in the earlier discussion, you've got 5 or 6 different levels of what low income housing is. You've got affordable versus workforce. But what does it really mean when we talk about affordable housing, and what are the implications for, in terms of housing for all?
And I think Assistant Secretary McCain covered this really eloquently, so I'll try to do as good of a job. But really, it's regardless of your income level, your housing is considered affordable when your rent and utilities don't exceed 30% of your income. And that doesn't matter what your income level is. But when you're in a household where you're paying greater than 30% for your housing costs, then you're considered cost burden. And per federal policy, that means your housing's not affordable. But what we find though is that as you start drilling into the different income bands, where we talk about extremely low income families who are earning 30% of our area median income or less, or you're talking about low income families that are like 50% and 60%, and then you're talking about under 80% altogether. It's like she said, that it means something different based on your income level. but you'll find the lower the income level and you're paying more than 30%, we're finding the lower your income, people are paying as upwards as 50, 60% of their income for just to sustain housing, which then makes the other areas, things that they need to take care of, they can't afford transportation, or what happens if you get sick and you have a medical bill or you're out of work, your housing and your ability to sustain that housing becomes more and more untenable the lower your income is, because the rents are really high here, and housing wages haven't been keeping up, with the increased cost of housing. And so you find that that implication for the lower income families is even greater. But we hear about the housing crisis and housing affordability more now, because it's also starting to be an issue for when you talk about paying more than 30% of your income for housing. Now folks who are considered, like you said, workforce housing or upper income are also finding they have to pay more than 30% of their salaries and household income to cover their housing costs as well. And because we have a supply issue here where there are now people across all income bands competing for some of the same housing stock, because we have a supply issue. So lower income folks are competing against higher income folks for homeownership opportunities as well as rental opportunities. You're finding the people that can afford to move to the areas now where you're seeing the growth, because people are coming back into the inner city. The cost of land or existing properties are lower. People are buying those and rebuilding on them, pushing out the lower income families, and then the higher income folks are moving into those communities and getting, but having to pay a lot also, because now there's a supply side issue. So the implication for everyone is that everyone's fighting for a smaller pot of housing, and that's impacting the cost as well as who can actually get housing. And so I'm sure Jackie will speak to this, is that we're seeing an increase in homelessness also because of that very thing.
Precisely. And Jackie, that's my question to you. Tell us a little bit about the most vulnerable population regarding housing. And I heard earlier that housing first in dealing with the most vulnerable populations is becoming the priority initiative, and then dealing with some of the mental health issues. So share with us a little bit about what you're seeing in regards to that. What are the challenges, and how can it be addressed?
Yes, I think it's really important to look at the what it really means to be able to pay 30% of your income toward housing, and what what the picture is for folks. So, somebody making federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour can afford to pay $377 a month toward rent and utilities. In Orange County, our living wage is $15.85 an hour, which is more than twice the minimum wage. But those folks can afford to spend $825 a month on housing and utilities. And the going rate for a one-bedroom apartment here is $1,400. And so really just looking at how, even if we pride ourselves on being living wage employers, but, even when we're paying living wage, people can't afford to live here. And so then, those folks, you're very vulnerable when you have your cost burdened and something happens that means that you can't, can no longer pay for that housing. And so then we see people who are without a place to stay, and we don't have enough shelter beds. And so really, finding oneself somewhere without a place to live produces immense trauma, and that results in, sometimes mental health issues, sometimes substance use issues. People who are, elderly or disabled, are much more vulnerable out in the elements, and just the trauma of homelessness, really creates a compounding effect in terms of people being able to actually get out of that situation, and even when they are able to get housing. And so housing first is something that we believe is, definitely a best practice, and that is how we want to operate our shelters and help folks get housing first, and then provide the support system surrounding that. But just somebody becoming homeless in the first place you know, creates a lot more issues and then folks need to deal with once they are able to get housing, if they are able to.
Yeah. So what are you finding as some of the emerging trends for addressing you know, the specific issues? What are you seeing in terms of programs, initiatives that can impact and make a difference? And I'll start with you, Yolanda. It's fine.
Sure. So in the space that DHIC works in, which is primarily developing, at least from rental housing side, is developing affordable communities using the low-income housing tax credit program. In that space, there's a lot more advocacy around recognizing that, you know, the program's pretty mature now. It started back in the mid 80s as part of tax reform. And so now we've had properties in the industry and even some of DHIC's own properties that are now as old as 30 years old. And the regulatory, you know, there's a regulatory period where you have to restrict the rents and incomes to serve the low income folks that the units are targeted toward. Obviously, as a nonprofit that's committed to this work, DHIC's goal is to always maintain any property we develop in perpetuity as for affordable residents. And so, but you have other developers who are involved in the space as well. And when those properties become to the end of the compliance period, they have the option to take those out of the program and turn those into market rate properties. And so we've been seeing losing housing stock in the affordable rental space because of that. As properties age and mature and the compliance period ends, those properties are then being turned into market rate developments. And so there's a recognition that we need to be finding strategies to preserve those units because we're losing stock and we can't build new stock fast enough to meet the need. And so some of our municipalities, including here in Wake County, has sponsored a fund that allows developers to go out and acquire existing properties. That's getting kicked off, and hopefully they'll be able to leverage additional dollars in that fund so that nonprofits and other groups that want to try and save those units and keep them as affordable can then go out and purchase those off the open market. And that's difficult to do competing with cash investors who are looking for opportunities to come in and buy properties and turn them into market rate. So preservation is very important. As you saw in the video with Willard Street, partnership with community advocates and community groups, along with the local government, has, led to using surplus land owned by the municipalities to make sure there's affordable housing being developed. In this case, in infield properties or sites that you haven't traditionally seen used for affordable housing. We've been talking with a number of church groups and organizations about using some of their underutilized spaces and land, and the church faith-based community has an interest also in trying to be a part of the solution and using some of their resources to help provide the spaces and land that affordable housing can be developed on. Also, you're seeing more people being encouraged to do more mixed income development so that you have a mix of incomes, market rate and low income units together. That's with the tools we have available currently, that's a little more challenging, but that is still something that's being heavily pushed, as well as trying to address zoning regulations to ensure that we can do more density, not just be so focused on just single family. And also here, we don't have inclusionary zoning that requires affordable housing to be included. And that's more of a state legislative issue is my understanding. And people are starting to focus on, how can we have that addressed and look for ways to make sure there's affordable housing included. Another thing you're seeing is that along transportation routes here in Raleigh and Wake County, there's the bus rapid transit corridors that are being proposed, and we'll start construction soon on some of those. And the municipalities and folks, identifying housing sites along those transportation routes as well to make sure that affordable housing is going to be near transit as that continues to grow and become a bigger focus on transportation needs in our region.
Oh, very good. A number of different initiatives. And so, time is of the essence. And hopefully we'll begin to see some of that. I know a number of things are in the works now, but to begin to see that, to actually cascade that down to impact the residents that are in need. What are you seeing, Jackie, in terms of emerging trends and initiatives?
Well, I definitely think Yolanda covered it well as the expert in development. We love the low-income housing tax credit developments, because that really caters to the folks that we are seeing who are in the extremely low income category of needing housing. We have here in Orange County Pee-wee Homes, which is a nonprofit that is building tiny homes and then supporting folks in community so they can age in community, so that they can be supported by neighbors. They generally try to do a few houses next to each other so that there really is that community and that support. And that kind of housing can be done with small pieces of land. I think in Orange County, like a lot of places, we don't have a lot of land to work with, and so we're really advocating that we use all of our publicly owned land that at least be evaluated for possibilities for extremely low income housing. And also, I think really important that Assistant Secretary McCain talked about with Section 8 vouchers right now. We have a lot of folks who have Section 8 vouchers in hand who are not able to use them here because there are not enough landlords who are taking those. And so really just the awareness and advocacy around that would be important. And we also really advocate that any of the new developments that we have for affordable housing or housing in general, that those folks be willing to take Section 8 vouchers if there's any kind of negotiating that can happen or folks are asking for, special zoning.
Does your organization address the landlords directly to get them open to accept the program? Is that part of what you do as well?
We do that specifically through our permanent supportive housing program, which is, which gets vouchers to support folks who have a disability and have difficulty staying housed. So those case managers will work directly with the landlords to ask them to host our folks who have our vouchers. We also here in Orange County there's a position in Orange County that's solely dedicated to reaching out to landlords. But it still is really tough because we're also competing with students and other folks coming to the area. And so it's just really important to stay on top of that.
Okay. We have a number of questions. I'll save my last question to the end, but we have a number of questions, both from registrants as well as on the chat. So I want to shift to engage some of those questions as well. And I would start with you, Yolanda. As young adults beginning their careers, what advice would you give them in pursuing their journey and purchasing their first home?
You definitely want to connect with resources like those at DHIC's Home Ownership Center to really learn about the mortgage process and how it works. I think the more education you have about, just what goes into getting approved for a mortgage and what's required to qualify, it's very important. And being educated when you go into that process is very important. You definitely want to, pay attention to your budgeting and housing counsel, HUD certified housing counselors can help you with that process and developing a budget, understanding, just the different mortgage products, what goes into qualifying, talk with you about credit. And so I think that's an important first step to do, is to connect with an agency that provides that service.
Okay, very good. Certainly call up DHIC.
And I was going to say it's and there's some others in the group in our area other than just DHIC, and there's a very nominal fee basically
Very
the cover
good.
material. So
Very good, very good. A question for you, Jackie, in the chat. How can we deal better with the housing managers who do not respect the residents, and also large conglomerates who avoid building the 17% required affordable housing, in their particular subdivision? The cards seem stacked against us. So there's seemingly not much power.
Yes. What was the first part of that question again?
So they're saying housing managers, don't respect the residents, and also you have large conglomerates who are not avoiding, giving their percentage, having a percentage of their housing for affordable in their respective subdivisions or buildings. How do we address that?
I mean, I definitely think that we need to compel our elected officials to hold developers accountable as much as possible to providing the affordable housing that we want in the community. That is, we have the biggest or the most opportunity to do that when folks are asking for variances or zoning changes, right? But just making sure that we're looking out for and advocating for that in every possible way. I think in terms of, building property managers not respecting tenants, it's important for us to be in conversation with those folks. And I'm not an expert in if there is anywhere in this community like an advocacy arm that does that. I know in San Francisco we had some tenant associations that were very strong in that, and I think if we need to look at that here, we should definitely do that. So that's, I guess that's what I would say.
and I'll add a little bit to that if I could. So in the case of DHIC's work, our resident services team works closely with our tenants, and then we do have situations where there's issues at the property level with management and tenants. They can help to navigate that process. I'm not sure, like Jackie said about, here in our area, you don't hear a lot about tenants organizations, but recently there are a lot of advocacy groups in various communities that are starting to educate citizens and residents about their rights, and helping them kind of come together and advocate for what their need beyond just the unit, and navigating that process with dealing with landlords.
Very good. And in the chat is the link for the home ownership program also, just for everyone's note. And I wish we could respond and answer address every question that's in the chat. But I think a couple of them have been spoken to. The last one that I'll raise is, this area, not just Chapel Hill, but Durham as well as Raleigh, are college towns. And so how do you deal with that in terms of affordable housing to help them? Because most campuses don't have enough on-campus housing, and a number of them have built in partnership with developers, off-campus housing, but that still is not sufficient to address everyone. How do we deal with that issue?
That's a little outside my expertise. I will say that unfortunately, the way the tax credit, low-income housing tax credit program is regulated and structured, it is not designed to serve your traditional full-time student. In fact, there's a very small exemption that allows full-time students to live in those units. And so the space that we work in really isn't designed to serve that group. So I'm not sure that I'm the appropriate person to try to respond to that question.
that suggests that there's another, that creates another stream of advocacy for, especially with this area being so dominant as a university area, which raises the last question. We want to be respectful of time and give the program back. The last question for each of you is, how can individuals, individually and collectively, in terms of their organizations in this audience, advocate for affordable housing? And as we've heard, affordable housing streams from homelessness to market because of the supply demand issues and the income issues that are being raised by industry in our area coming in and creating that shortage. So what would you offer to individuals on this event and organizations? What can they do to be advocates in this space? And I'll start with you, Jackie.
Yeah, so I would say find out who the organizations are in your community who are building housing for people, especially at the lowest income levels, and support them, give them money, speak in favor of the developments that they're bringing to city council, ask what you can do for to help. I would say challenge neighbors who oppose building affordable housing in their backyards. This is, increasingly, a big issue, and we really need folks who are going to stand up with the folks who are desperately needing housing and say, yes, we want this to happen in our community. We want to support everyone to be able to have housing that they can afford, combat the stereotypes, and just educate yourself about what's happening in your community and look at the faces of the people you see are struggling, recognize the shared humanity, and make a connection with them.
Yolanda?
No, I think Jackie said it very well. I think from a developer's perspective in this space, also I would encourage folks to talk, just like Jackie said, kind of educate themselves on what's being done in the area, advocate for more affordable housing, any opportunity that you have with your local, council or county commissioners or city council people. Definitely you want to, if you know landlords that own private property, even small landlords, and they're not accepting vouchers, maybe encourage them, to look at the program. We really do, as an industry, need to figure out how to incentivize private landlords to take the housing choice vouchers. And I know there's a certain level of bureaucracy that goes to that sometimes discourages folks beyond the discrimination that we see also around who's using vouchers. But we kind of need to attack it from all prongs. We have, the supply issue, so we really need to figure out how we can get more units and more resources into the developments. We also need to, make it easier to build those units. I think another thing we could do is point to examples for people who are opposed, to show them that affordable, just because something's called affordable housing, when you look at what's being built and developed with groups in our community, you'll see that there's very little difference between what a market rate housing beyond, the bones of the developments. What it costs to build is very similar. They may have some additional amenities, or some of the finishes may be a little more expensive, but basically it's the same housing. So affordable housing is not cheap housing. It's high quality. It's high quality housing, and I think the more we can use and show those examples to people, to combat that stereotype that it's something that you don't want in your community.
Thank you so much to both of you. There are a few other questions in the chat that I would offer that we would send them to you. And as the organization rolls out feedback, perhaps we can give some response to the remaining questions. Thank you both for sharing your time and your passion and the information to us. We all have opportunity to be advocates in this space. You have your political, city, county agencies, you have your developers and your other organizations around this space. So get involved, engage yourself, find your lane where you can give voice, because there are many opportunities to do that. Thank you so much. I will turn the program back over to Diane Fletcher. We appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful session. So much great information that has been shared. And we truly would like to thank our panelists and our moderator for an excellent session. We just want to remind our persons that have joined us today to please complete our survey that is available in the chat. And we will be giving away a gift card to those who complete our survey. Thank you very much. And I will turn the program over to the chair, Mary Phillips of our Social Action Committee, for her call to action.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you, Gloria, and thank you to Yolanda and to Jackie for being here today. The call to action is actually embedded in the vision and mission of all of the organizations that are engaged in affordable housing, and also the kinds of other issues that come along with the housing issues. As you notice, Yolanda talked about what all that they do beyond just the creation of housing. And Jackie is in a space that doesn't involve their creating the housing, but providing housing and services to the people that they serve. So I would ask you to become familiar with the many, many organizations in our area that are engaged in providing and servicing in the affordable housing arena. The call, as I said, the call is really in their vision and their missions. And I would invite you to go and look at a few of those to really infuse yourself with it. But the call is simple. There are 3 things stated on your slide there. Build more, I think that came out. Sustain and retain what's built. Retention, as Yolanda mentioned, is a significant issue in terms of when the time runs out and the builder can do something else with the property. And we also want to sustain and retain communities. And I think a lot of the work that both of these organizations do is around sustaining and retaining communities. I want to on the second slide, I put quotes, not exact quotes, but some of the words from Yvonne Lewis, who was referenced earlier by Gemma Bowler, who was a social action advocate in the Virginia Beach area. And her comments sort of reflected what I tried to share last year. And that is that no effort is too small. So never think that what I'm doing won't make a difference. It will. Every effort, in her words, carries impact. And I also wanted to reference another person who led our social action work in a Delta Sigma Theta, at least. And that is attorney Frankie Muse Freeman. And both of these ladies I'm referencing are no longer with us, but she would always say to us, we've had 33 years of Delta Days at the nation's capital, and she would always say to us, she'd bring the call to action at the end of it, she'd always say, get to work. So find the work, that space that you can be engaged in, and as Attorney Freeman said, get to work. So that's the call. I want to thank all of the persons who participated in this event in terms of being here today and presenting, including our keynote speakers, our panelists, our moderators, I'll call her facilitator, Diane Pleasure, and all of our program participants, all of you that came today for this event. So thank you for that. There is another small group that I want to recognize. As we decided to, as a committee, I also want to recognize the committee that put this together and thank all of them. It was a committee made up of individuals from each one of the organizations that are represented in the slide before you. As we began to think about focusing on affordable housing, which is really our first program doing that, and I hope you were here to see the slides representing two of the organizations' experience. I'm on camera. Sorry, two of the organizations' experiences in the affordable housing area, and it's mostly around helping with habitat bills and making donations, financial donations. So we go back a long way, almost to the beginning of Habitat's presence in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, Orange County, excuse me. But as we began to think about affordable housing, what we came to realize was how huge the universe of that was. So it was important to talk with people experienced in the field. And there were 3 consultants whose names I want to mention. And I know that at least one of them is here today. First, Dolores Bailey, who many of you know, who is with Empowerment in the work of providing affordable housing. Secondly, attorney Steve Drake, who had experiences in the legal field with Habitat. I want to thank him very much. You know how attorneys are, they will get you straight if you're going in the wrong direction. And lastly, I want to thank Mr. Frederick White, who was one of my students many years ago and has worked in real estate financing and is currently working with the city of Los Angeles as their one of their housing advisors, And he is here today and joined us, of course, at 7 a.m. his time. So I want to thank Fred for being here and for all of his input. And lastly, to thank you again for for your presence here.